Hello, good morning. This is the sixth video. It's a series based on your questions. Now, the question I received this morning had to do with death. Apparently, a young man is frightened of death, even just thinking about it, and wants to know a little bit more about it. So, what I will say is that you are a human being. You are a being playing the human role, and there's never a time when you are not being. Now let me clarify that a little bit more by telling you a little bit about my story. I was brought up in a very small country, Malta, British Dominion, and it was 100% Catholic. It believed in sin, and it believed in hell, it believed in damnation and the devil, and so on and on. When I was 8 years old, I was sexually assaulted by a priest that left a very bad memory, and it frightened me a lot. I became a very difficult teenager, and but there was one thing that happened. I became a heavy seeker of truth. I wanted to know what life was about. I remember I subscribed to the Psychologist magazine coming from Britain, and which I was getting once every week, and I just loved going into it and learning all about how the mind works. I was crazy about psychology, and that's the only thing that kept me going. Incidentally, since I did not communicate my feelings of loneliness and fear and deprivation, I gave myself totally to physical activity. I indulged in boxing, wrestling, judo, acrobatics, gymnastics, and mainly bodybuilding. And I was very good at them because I gave my whole body and soul into them. The need to know the truth, the need to find out the truth was so strong, and I was agnostic at the time. I felt that I should go to Canada and seek a teacher. I left for Canada, and I started work in a folks health service, which had to do with health, massage, and physiotherapy, and physical activity that I was very good at. And in 1973, I had a vision of Sri Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, a sage which had passed away physically in 1950. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know who he was. But 6 months later, while walking around in Yorkville, that was in Toronto, I found a book with the cover of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, and then I knew that this was real. I followed his teaching. I gave up physiotherapy and decided to go in a basement apartment and meditate, etc., etc. In a short while, I started giving classes in yoga and meditation. Then it happened that I put an ad, put a website on about Course in Miracles, because I became introduced to A Course in Miracles at the time, and I started teaching it. My website was done by myself. It's a very amateurish thing, but however, an American woman in Colorado, Denver, she saw my picture, she was attracted to me. She called me up one long weekend and she asked if she could visit me, and I said yes. Anyway, to make a long story short, we got along well in those 3 days spent together, and when she went back to the States to go to her work, she was a graphic artist and astrologer. She couldn't help but think about me, and all she wanted to do was leave, to leave there, leave her 2 teenage boys. One was 14 years of age, and give them back to their father, and so that she could stay with me. Anyway, she came, bag and baggage, at my door, and we lived together. In the year 2000, we got married. And at that time, there was a lot of insecurity because she couldn't become a Canadian citizen being married. The reason we got married was the thought that she could be a citizen, but I was wrong. And that frustrated her. She felt insecure. She was feeling guilty about her son being left behind. And there was a lot of difficulty in the relationship, and it became a very conflicted relationship. There was a point, there was so much emotion at the time that I felt like I'm between a rock and a hard place. I felt like I'm damned if I did and damned if I didn't. So then I went into the bathroom, I retired, and I cried. And I said, please, Bhagavan, help me. I don't know anything. All the psychology I learned, I don't know a damn thing. Help me. I don't have any answers. And then, believe it or not, I actually heard a voice inside me say, there are no answers to life's problems, for life is not a problem to be solved. There is only now. And it was that simple. I emerged from the bathroom feeling incredibly peaceful. Anyway, we began to get used to each other, and as time went on, she was helping me a lot in doing what I did, which was sort of giving meditation talks, etc., etc. In the year 2007, for no apparent reason, but then later on I found out that it was a spiritual emergence, something I needed to learn. But anyway, for no apparent reason, I developed a very high fever. Sylvia, who happened to be my wife, a wonderful woman, very, very patient, and as a matter of fact, she was a great help. She took my temperature, and the temperature was going up even above 105 Fahrenheit. So that was very serious. She was afraid that I was going to burn my brains out. And but anyway, I didn't want to go to a doctor because somehow or other I felt that this wasn't an ordinary disease. As a matter of fact, during the fever, I could actually see even with my closed eyes. So there was a hint that somehow or other I must have developed the third eye. When the fever abated, I would go into tremendous shaking, tremendous trembling, and therefore I could hardly eat and I could hardly sleep. Within a few days, it happened to be a Friday morning, I knew I was dying. Sylvia took one look at me and she called 911, and I was rushed to the hospital at Vancouver General. While I was there on the gurney, I had an out-of-body experience. And I wish I had the words to tell you how I felt. It felt so good, so free. I was bodiless. And also, I was fully conscious. I was fully conscious of the doctors in the room, the nurses, the patients there, Sylvia lying next to my body on the gurney. And I was perfectly clear. As a matter of fact, I was more mentally clear than I've ever been in my life. And then at one point I saw a light. Either it was coming at me or I was going towards it, but nonetheless I was kind of immersed in that light. And I felt so loved. I mean, I never knew love like that before. I mean, I had a great mother. She was very, very loving. Despite my difficult years as a teenager, she always loved me. And she used to say, well, that's Bertie, you know. And she accepted everything about me. But anyway, not to lose my point. Picture this. Picture having a wife or husband and children, and you love them with all your heart. Multiply that 1,000 times. And that's how much love I felt in that light experience. It taught me so much. Well, when I got back to the body, because I saw Sylvia looking at my body lying there and with my eyes closed, and I saw her sadness, and so I felt I had to return because I couldn't leave her. She would be all alone in Canada. I told my story to a nurse, and she looked at me as if I was crazy. And then there was a doctor who approached me, and he said that what you seem to have is very serious. Because I had lesions, you know, I had black, blue, one leg was larger than another, I looked hideous. I was so sick. And one doctor told me that was serious. I told him what I experienced. And he looked at me strangely. He looked at me so strangely that I felt at any moment he could have put me in a psych ward. So at that moment I decided not to talk about it anymore. I kept it all inside. And I kept it inside for 10 years. And incidentally, while I was in the light, I received a message from the light saying, do not take any drugs or have anything done in the hospital, and you'll be healed in 3 days. And that's exactly what happened. In 3 days, I was back home, perfectly normal and healthy. Riding the bicycle and going for walks and even runs, etc., etc. So anyway, so that was that. Incidentally at that time, I used to color my beard dark, you know, so that I look younger. And but while in the hospital, I just simply said, who cares? So I let the grayness take over. Okay. Now, after that, I began to realize one thing, that while I was in the light, I was in perfect consciousness. As a matter of fact, I heard more and I saw more than I did physically. All my senses were there, and I was Burt. Burt did not disappear, although when I was in the light, I knew that I was also the light. It's just like seeing myself in the future. Remember that in the light there is no time. And so even though it was only 1 minute's experience, yet it felt like weeks that I received all the knowledge inherent in my consciousness. And this is where I learned something very precious. What I learned is this. I gave up the study of psychology, and I started teaching non-duality satsangs at my place. And I did not talk about my experience because I was afraid. People might think I'm crazy. But one day, I bought a Blu-ray to watch videos. And one day I saw a man give a talk during an IANDS conference. And IANDS stands for International Association of Near-Death Experience Studies. Yeah. And and he talked about his own experience, and it was identical to mine. And he was talking to a great deal of people. And I thought, wow, he's not afraid of being sent to a loony bin, you know. And I cried because it was exactly like mine. And so from then on, I decided to start talking about it. I did the last 2.5 years, I didn't talk about it for 10 years, but the last 2.5 years, I researched the IANDS, And I researched about 200 people having NDE experiences, light experiences, and they were very more or less similar to mine. They all experienced out of body, and they all experienced the light, and they all experienced the happiness and joy that I never knew before, and they all felt at home. They knew that that light was their true home. Well, now this is where I want to go into explaining about death and your question. My love of psychology, which I gave up, also made me realize that psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, and many counselors teach that consciousness is derived from the brain. It is the brain that creates consciousness. Wow. I was completely convinced that consciousness is non-local. I also became aware that there is such a thing as soul, because consciousness is the soul, while spirit is the very being itself. So this is where we're going to understand here about death. First of all, there is no such thing as unconsciousness. Unconsciousness never happens. The body might drop seemingly dead or unconscious, but it's never unconscious. Yes, it is true that many people have had, I was a hypnotherapist for 30 years. It is true that many people have gone through a seeming sense of unconsciousness and had no memory. But when I hypnotized them during that time that they seemed to be unconscious, they actually had memories. They actually experienced their state, because the soul is non-local. The soul is consciousness. And it does not reside in the body, but it takes care of the body. It makes us see, experience, sense, etc. And we think it's the body doing it. It's not the body. It is the soul that's doing all that. The soul is the one that goes from lifetime to lifetime, ever learning about itself. And it goes through a different astrological sign, a different numerology, different time period, and always learning and moving towards its own spirit. So you are made up of a body, soul, and spirit. The soul is that which evolves. So every lifetime you are learning closer and closer about your empty state. And empty state was written about in my book, The 4 Unknown Facts of Reality. And emptiness, which is the way to live without judgment and without time consciousness, brings you closer and closer to the full evolvement of the soul. When the soul evolves, as it evolves, it moves closer and closer to spirit. So, in other words, we are all in an evolving state. Some people have a greater capacity to understand because they have greater knowledge about their true state of being through their soul development. And so, this is what I want to leave you with. Okay? That the soul or consciousness is non-local. It does not reside inside you. It resides everywhere, as you. So when you drop the body, you're still very much alive. As a matter of fact, you're more alive at that point than you've ever been before. Because you hear more, you see more, you feel more than before. But the thing is that you're beyond time and space. Because again, it's not local. You see, it doesn't live in time. So, because it doesn't live in time, there's no negativity. Because there's no past and future. There is always now. And now is always perfect love. So therefore, your true nature is perfect love. You cannot die, even if you tried. Because you are an eternal soul, an eternal being. And soul and spirit are one. Okay? So the whole point of being on earth is so that physically we gain experience, and not to judge any experience as good or bad, right or wrong, should or shouldn't. It is an experience. And every experience is to teach us something. Now, in our moral sense, because we've been brought up religious, we make it seem like, oh, it's wrong. But in truth, and this is so liberating, there is no right or wrong. There is only experience. And then to learn from that experience so that we become more and more loving and compassionate towards ourselves. Because what you are loving and forgiving is always yourself. You are the soul itself. You are the part that never dies. And this is why meditation is so beautiful, because when you enter moments of silence, that silence itself is your inner guide. My inner guide, I always call it Bhagavan, and it guided me always perfectly. So this is what I want to leave you with. You are a beautiful being. You are a soul. So always learn that whatever is happening, don't call it wrong, don't call it bad, don't judge it, but simply see its timeless state and learn from it. And then as you gain compassion towards yourself, you begin to have compassion towards others, and before you know it, you're moving the soul closer to spirit, which is all one. Thank you. Namaste.